It can be incredibly painful, confusing, and isolating when relationships that once held significance in our lives enter a season of silence, distance, or even outright separation. Moments arrive that feel undeniably final, like the closing of a chapter or the end of a story. You may sit with the quiet ache in your heart, wrestling with questions that have no easy answers. Is this truly over? Has God closed the door on this connection? Or is there still something more that the Creator of all things, the Redeemer of brokenness, wants to do between you and this person? It's hard to tell, isn't it? Especially when emotions are high, when hurt lingers, or when silence stretches on for weeks, months, or even years. Our human perspective is limited, often clouded by our feelings, our past experiences, and our fears about the future. We look at the present reality, the lack of communication, the absence, the unresolved pain, and it's easy to conclude that things are simply finished. We might even try to force that sense of finality, attempting to move on, to forget, to close the door ourselves. But sometimes, even when our minds tell us it's over, our spirits sense something different. When God isn't finished with a connection, whether it's a friendship, a family tie, or another significant bond, there are quiet signs. These aren't always dramatic or obvious. They don't necessarily involve sudden breakthroughs or miraculous phone calls. Often, these signs are subtle whispers to your spirit, gentle nudges from the Holy Spirit, confirmations that speak peace and hope into the very place where confusion and pain reside. You might feel a deep peace, even when the external circumstances make no sense. You might notice how that person, or the memory of them, keeps showing up in unexpected ways, not in a way that causes torment, but in a way that brings a specific, unshakable feeling. There could be moments of significant growth happening in both of your lives separately, yet somehow, in God's mysterious economy, it all feels like it's working towards something greater, something unseen. When God has more planned for a relationship, when His purposes within that connection are not yet fulfilled, He won't let your heart fully disconnect, not in the way it does when something is truly complete and requires full release. He might allow distance, He might allow seasons of silence, but this space is often for development, for healing, for individual refinement, not for total, irreversible destruction of the potential He sees. Discernment in these situations requires looking beyond the surface, beyond the current pain, and listening to the quieter, more profound movements of God in your spirit. These are spiritual signs in relationships, pointing to God's potential ongoing work. Let's explore some of these biblical signs: relationship restoration, signs that might indicate when God is not done with a relationship. One of the clearest spiritual signs that God isn't finished with a relationship is a persistent, quiet sense that the door between you two has never fully shut. Think about it. You've tried to close the chapter. You've perhaps told yourself it's over, maybe even declared it to others. You've attempted to move on, to put it behind you. And yet, deep down, the story still feels open. It's like trying to close a door and finding that it just won't latch, or it gently swings back open on its own. This resonates with the message in Revelation 3:8, where Jesus speaks to the church in Philadelphia. "See, I have set before you an open door, and no one can shut it. For you have a little strength, have kept my word, and have not denied my name." While this verse is spoken in a specific context to a church, the principle of an open door that God Himself keeps open is powerful and can have metaphorical applications to other areas of our lives, including relationships where God still intends to work. Even if communication has stopped entirely, or significant time has passed since you last connected in a meaningful way, something inside you quietly senses that the connection isn't completely severed in God's eyes. The door didn't slam shut with a resounding thud of finality. Instead, it seems to have quietly stayed cracked, just enough to allow a sliver of light, a breath of air, a subtle reminder that this might not be finished according to God's plan. That quiet space, that slightly ajar door, could very well be God Himself holding it open for what He still wants to do. God sometimes leaves certain relationships in this state of open possibility, so He can bring things back together in His perfect timing, for His perfect purposes. When something is truly and completely done according to God's will, there is usually an accompanying strong sense of peace, a settling in your spirit that allows you to release it fully, to experience a true sense of finality. But when God still has work to complete, whether it's work in you, in the other person, or in the space between you, He often leaves these small, sometimes almost imperceptible, signs to keep your heart aware, to keep a channel open in the spiritual realm. That opening may be the space needed for deep healing that must happen individually before any form of reconciliation can occur. It could be the space required for personal growth, for lessons to be learned, for character to be refined. It might be the necessary distance before future reconciliation becomes possible. The fact that you've noticed that no matter how many times you try to let go, that door simply refuses to lock fully, that can be a significant indicator. Whether it's in your prayer life, random thoughts that bring them to mind without bringing torment, or unexpected reminders that pop up in your path, God continues to bring this person back to your spirit in a way that suggests ongoing relevance, not just past history. When God is involved in a connection, open doors stay open until the work He started is done, or until He Himself is ready to close it. Our human tendency is to try and take control, to force closure, because the uncertainty is painful, or to try and pry the door open ourselves before God's timing. But your job, in recognizing this sign, is not to force anything, but to stay faithful in your own walk, to trust God's hand on the situation, and not force a closure that God hasn't commanded or brought about with His own peace. Sometimes we rush to close something before God is finished unfolding His purposes within it. But His word reminds us that what He opens, no one can shut unless He allows it. That lingering connection, that sense of an open door, isn't necessarily a sign of your weakness or inability to move on. It can be an open door from the one who sees the full picture, who holds the timeline in His hands. Trust His hand on the situation, even when you don't fully understand the why or the how. It is often in the mystery of the almost closed, but not quite, that God is doing His deepest, most patient work. A second powerful sign that God isn't finished with a relationship is when, despite the hurt, the difficulty, or the separation, you feel a quiet, sometimes uncomfortable, calling to work through the issues, rather than simply walking away from them completely. The natural, often self-protective, response to pain in a relationship is to retreat, to build walls, to avoid confrontation or difficult conversations. It's easier to cut ties, to distance ourselves emotionally and physically, than to face the brokenness head-on. But there are times when, even when walking away seems like the path of least resistance, something deeper within you resists that easy escape. James 5:16 encourages believers, confess your trespasses to one another and pray for one another, that you may be healed. The effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. While this verse speaks broadly about healing within the community of faith, the principle of confronting sin and hurt, seeking healing through confession and prayer with one another, points to God's desire for restoration and reconciliation in relationships. When you feel this inner pull, this spiritual calling, it's a desire not merely for superficial peace, but for genuine healing and resolution of the underlying issues. Your heart doesn't feel settled or at peace with ignoring the brokenness, pretending it didn't happen, or simply burying it under layers of distance. Instead, you feel a distinct tug, a spiritual prompting, towards making things right, towards seeking understanding, or towards praying specifically for the healing of the relationship dynamics. This feeling is a spiritual sign that God may still have something for you to work through, whether it's working as on yourself, in relation to this person, or working as with this person towards a different future dynamic. Healing takes immense courage, especially when past hurts have been deep, and the thought of re-engaging feels vulnerable. It would often be far easier to shut down emotionally, to maintain the distance as a form of self-preservation. But God often uses that discomfort, that inner disquiet about leaving things broken, to push you into greater spiritual maturity, to teach you His ways of grace and truth, rather than allowing you to default to avoidance. When you feel called to engage in potentially hard conversations, guided by wisdom and timing, of course, or when you feel a persistent call to pray, specifically for the healing and restoration of this connection, it's often because God isn't done using this relationship context for good, either for your sanctification or for a potential future purpose for the relationship itself. He prepares your heart to rebuild, to forgive, to seek understanding, rather than defaulting to permanent rejection. This kind of obedience, this willingness to lean into the discomfort of potential reconciliation or healing work, isn't driven by mere human emotion or a desperate need for the relationship to be what it once was. It's a leading in your spirit. God often brings you back to think about certain people, not just because He wants the relationship to continue exactly as it was, but because He wants to complete a work of reconciliation, healing, or spiritual growth, through the context of that connection. You grow stronger, more like Christ, when you face what was broken with His strength, and let God guide how it should be addressed or potentially restored. The desire to work through it, the inner conviction that keeps rising up, may not originate with you at all. It may come directly from His hand on your heart. When God is leading you toward peace, His peace often involves facing the truth, seeking healing, and praying through difficult situations, rather than running away from them. That inner conviction is His way of showing you that the relationship might not be finished. It might just be in a season of refining, preparation, or redirection. Keep praying, stay open to how God might be asking you to participate in that healing process, even if it feels small or slow. This willingness to engage with the possibility of working through things, rather than an overwhelming urge to simply escape, is a significant spiritual sign. A third sign, and one that speaks deeply to the transformative power of grace, is when thinking about the person involved in the difficult relationship feels peaceful, not shameful or filled with guilt or overwhelming blame. Often, when a relationship has gone through significant pain, conflict, or separation, thinking about the other person brings a rush of negative emotions: shame over things you might have done, guilt over missed opportunities, bitterness over how you were hurt, blame directed at them or yourself, and a general sense of discomfort or distress. But when God is at work, bringing healing and covering the situation with His grace, something shifts. Ephesians 2:8 reminds us, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God." Grace is unmerited favor, a divine covering and empowerment that transforms our perspective and our feelings, not by ignoring reality, but by bringing God's perspective and healing into it. When this sign is present, you find that thinking about their name, seeing a reminder of them, or reflecting on the past no longer triggers that intense wave of shame, guilt, or unresolved bitterness. Instead, there is a steady sense of grace, a quiet peace, even after everything that has happened. This isn't your emotions playing tricks on you, nor is it a sign that you've somehow forgotten the pain. It's often a profound indicator that God has covered this connection, and your heart's response to it, with His grace. Shame and overwhelming blame tend to fade or lose their power when God is actively involved in bringing healing and releasing burdens. When you think about people God has clearly moved you on from, relationships that are truly complete in His eyes, there is usually a sense of detachment, sometimes even indifference, not in a negative way, but simply a lack of strong emotional pull or a clear sense of peace about the finality. But when God is still working on something related to that connection, even if the work is primarily within you, He often gives you this specific peace regarding the as person, allowing your heart to be still when their name or memory surfaces. The absence of that crippling guilt or pervasive shame is a powerful signal that you have grown, that you have likely extended forgiveness, either to them or yourself, or both, empowered by God, and that you are walking in a place of grace concerning the situation. Grace is fundamentally a gift, not something earned. And when that gift of grace surrounds a person or a past situation in your mind and heart, it usually means that God's story isn't finished unfolding in that context. You've come a long way from where things once were. You no longer hold on to bitterness as tightly, nor does blame consume you. Instead, you feel a soft reminder that what happened, as painful as it was, didn't destroy you. In fact, often these difficult relationships, through God's refining fire, have grown you in profound ways. That growth came wrapped in grace. And grace doesn't show up randomly. It's always connected to God's intentional work. This person may still have a place in the periphery of your life, or at least in the landscape of your spiritual awareness, because God's peace regarding them won't let them leave your heart completely in a negative, painful way. It's not about going back in time to the way things were. It's about walking forward under the covering and guidance of God's grace, trusting His finished work in your own heart, and potentially His ongoing work in theirs or in the space between you. What God has washed clean with His grace, you don't need to carry in guilt or shame. Just be open to what He is still writing into the story, trusting the peace He has given you as a compass. A fourth sign that God might not be finished with a relationship is closely related to the previous one, but distinct. You have a sense of peace specifically when you think about the possibility of reconnecting with them one day. This isn't the same as wishing for it out of loneliness or trying to manipulate a situation. It's a quiet, internal settledness that arises when you consider a hypothetical future where paths might cross again or communication might resume. Isaiah 32:17 states, "The work of righteousness will be peace, and the effect of righteousness, quietness and assurance forever." Righteousness, in a biblical sense, speaks to being in right standing with God, and also living in right relationship with others, reflecting God's character. When God is potentially orchestrating a future rightness or reconciliation, He often provides a precursor of peace concerning that possibility. When you envision reconnecting with them one day, perhaps running into them unexpectedly, receiving a message, or even initiating contact, if led, it doesn't trigger a wave of anxiety, dread, or panic. Instead, you feel calm, settled, and surprisingly okay with the idea, even though you have absolutely no control over how or when it could happen. That kind of peace isn't generated by your own emotional regulation, it's spiritual. It often means God is giving you a glimpse, a quiet assurance, that restoration, or a different form of connection, could still be part of His plan, and that it wouldn't be outside of His will. You don't feel an urge to chase them down, to force a meeting, or to manipulate circumstances. There's no desperate clinging to the idea. You simply feel still about the possibility. That quiet assurance often comes when God sovereignly gives you a sense of what He might do in the future, a future that aligns with His purposes. When that deep, unshakable peace stays in place concerning the prospect of future connection, it is usually a strong sign of His hand being potentially involved in that future scenario. Sometimes, thinking about reconnecting with someone from a painful past brings more confusion, anxiety, and emotional turmoil than clarity or peace, but not in this specific instance. If this sign is present, you don't feel chaos, internal pressure, or a sense of desperation driving the thought. Instead, it feels like taking a deep breath, a quiet knowing that that could happen, and it would be okay. That's a rare kind of peace, especially in the context of difficult relationships, and it's a peace that only God can truly give. You may not know the full picture of how God might bring about any future connection, or even as if He definitively will, but you do know how your spirit feels when contemplating the possibility. God is not the author of confusion or anxiety in matters where He is leading. So when peace shows up consistently in relation to thinking about potential future connection, you can trust that He is still in control of the situation, and that this possibility is not outside the realm of His will. Let that peace guide your heart and allow you to wait patiently on Him until He moves, if and when He chooses to. When it is His will for a reconnection or a new season for the relationship, He won't let you miss the guidance. The peace is often the guidepost. Finally, a fifth compelling sign that God isn't finished working in a relationship, even one that is currently distant or changed, is when that person or the memory and impact they had still pushes you closer to God, even from afar. The nature of relationships is that they shape us. People come into our lives and influence our trajectory, our beliefs, and our spiritual walk, and that influence doesn't always cease just because the relationship dynamic changes or distance is introduced. Hebrews 10:24 says, "And let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works." This verse is often applied to community within the church, encouraging mutual encouragement towards godly living. However, the principle that people in our lives can serve to stir us up can apply more broadly. Even if you are no longer in active, close relationship with someone, their presence in your past, or even distant awareness of their life now, might continue to serve a purpose in stirring you towards faith, love, and good works. Perhaps it's something they occasionally post on social media that contains a nugget of truth or reflects a changed heart that encourages you in your own journey. Maybe it's a memory you reflect on, remembering a time they exemplified faith or challenged you in a positive way, and that memory spurs you to seek God yourself. It could even be the difficult lessons learned through the challenges in that relationship that continue to drive you to prayer, to seek God's healing, or to rely more fully on His strength and wisdom. Their influence, even from afar, didn't stop just because the active connection shifted. God may still be using them, or the context of the relationship with them, to stir something good and godly in you. Sometimes, people are meant to be catalysts who push us closer to God, even when they are not physically near or actively involved in our daily lives. Their lasting impact, their spiritual footprint on your life, doesn't fade if God is still using it. That kind of spiritual connection, where someone's distant presence or past influence continues to fuel your faith or draw you nearer to the Lord, isn't common, and when it lingers, it often means God still has His hand on the situation in some way. Influence like that comes with divine purpose. Your growth is not ultimately dependent on being with them in a specific relationship structure, but the fact that their presence, past or distant, continues to bear the fruit of drawing you closer to the Lord, is proof of what God planted in you through that connection. If they encouraged you to pray more deeply, to seek God's face, to understand Scripture, or to make better, more Christ-like choices, that enduring impact is something God honors and uses. A connection that strengthens your walk with God, even indirectly or from a distance, is rarely, if ever, wasted in God's economy. That kind of spiritual fruit shows there is something deeper at play than just human compatibility or circumstance. It's not about holding on to the past relationship itself, but about recognizing what God still uses from that connection for His glory and your spiritual benefit. If someone still makes you want to grow spiritually, makes you examine your own heart, or spurs you towards love and good works simply through their existence or memory, that is a powerful spiritual sign that God often speaks through those He isn't finished using, not necessarily in your life in a relational sense, but in your journey towards Him. Don't ignore the enduring spiritual impact of people who, even from a distance, help you walk more faithfully in God's purpose. Discerning God's plan for relationships, especially when they are difficult, requires patience, prayer, and a willingness to listen to the subtle ways the Holy Spirit speaks. These 5 signs, the door that never fully shuts, the call to work through issues, the peace when thinking about them, the peace regarding potential future reconnection, and their enduring spiritual influence, are not guarantees that a relationship will be restored to its previous form. God's ways are higher than our ways, and His plans might involve a different kind of connection, a season of continued distance for a specific purpose, or ultimately, a peaceful release when His work is fully complete. But these signs are significant indicators that God might not be finished working in the situation. They are invitations to continue seeking His face, praying for guidance, and remaining open to His will. They are signals that even in the quiet, the distance, or the difficulty, God's purposes are still unfolding. They offer hope and reassurance that you are not alone in the confusion, and that your Heavenly Father is intimately involved in the details of your life, including your relationships. Trust the peace God gives you. Trust the quiet callings in your spirit. Trust the ways He continues to draw you closer to Himself, even through the complex tapestry of human connection. Continue to seek healing broken relationships God might be working on, knowing that His timing is perfect and His love is steadfast. Whether God leads to reconciliation, a new kind of relationship, or a peaceful understanding that allows for full release, He will guide you. Your part is to remain in Him, attentive to the spiritual signs, and surrendered to His sovereign plan. If this message has resonated with you, if it has spoken peace, or brought a sense of hope into a difficult situation, please consider liking this video. Your like helps signal that this content is encouraging and helps it reach others who might be wrestling with similar questions about when God is not done with a relationship. We would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Which of these 5 signs spoke most directly to your heart today? Have you experienced any of these spiritual signs in relationships you are navigating? Sharing your thoughts and experiences can be a source of encouragement to others in this community. And if you desire more faith-filled content like this, messages designed to inspire and uplift your walk with God, please subscribe to Pure Inspirational. Your support in liking, commenting, and subscribing helps us share faith-filled encouragement with a world that desperately needs it. Be blessed, and may you find peace and clarity as you continue to discern God's loving hand in every area of your life, including your relationships.